if I'd call it the online right, because I don't think Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and repeaters of them can genuinely be called right wing. They all say they're against Trump. They despise Trump. They think Trump is a sellout. I think they demoralize Americans, and I'm not an American, but I feel demoralized by it. You see Tucker challenging basic narratives like that the West were the good guys in World War II. He's saying Churchill was the enemy, the nuclear bomb was immoral, and maybe Hitler wasn't as, like he has guests on who say these things unchallenged. He had Nick Fuentes on, a rabid anti-Semite who endorsed Stalin, and Tucker just sort of nodded along. Candace Owens feels a little bit like Jussie Smollett. Her latest emissions sound crazy, but what can I say? These people appear, I say appear because it might be some fake bots there, but they appear to have a massive audience. What on earth is going on with the troll right?
Well, they do have a massive audience, and there are fake bots. We learned over the last few days since Elon Musk rolled out a new feature on X that allows you to see where some of these accounts are based, that some of the most vociferously anti-Israel and sometimes anti-Trump accounts on the so-called right are run by people in Bangladesh and in Poland and in Egypt and in East Asia and all kinds of places that have nothing to do with the United States. So there have been a lot of people masquerading as Trump supporters who have turned against him because of Israel or whatever, which turned out not to be the case. But look, Trump and Candace do have large audiences. Let me take a step back and just talk about the environment here. There are two big factors. One is the cancel culture of the Biden administration, which really destroyed faith among conservative viewers and listeners and readers in mainstream media and created an audience for people whose views are suppressed. And when you talk about marginalized people, you're talking about people with legitimate views, such as critics of COVID policies. And you're also talking about some people with some rather difficult views, such as neo-Nazis or Stalinists on the left and so forth. So you're getting a mixed bag. And then the other side of it is that the online podcasting world, social media world, has its own business environment that is heavily dependent on money coming in through advertising and sponsors. And many of these podcasts are getting a lot of clicks and views, but not a lot of sponsors. So they are persuadable in one direction or another if they get a lot of funding from one or two sources. So what I think is happening is, on the one hand, you've got people who are becoming more extreme in their views because they feel canceled. And there's an audience for them because people are more willing to listen to marginalized voices than they were in the past. Sometimes, for example, the Anti-Defamation League, which was founded as a Jewish civil rights organization, has been too vociferous in accusing people of anti-Semitism in many cases before they've actually done anything anti-Semitic. And this has been a criticism I've made for many years as a Jewish person myself. And so I think they've pushed people into a column that is, shall we say, at least hostile to Israel, if not always hostile to the Jewish community itself. And that, I think, is where Tucker and Candace really began their drift. But then you've also got this business environment where you have to say outrageous things to draw eyes, to draw ears, to draw clicks, and where there are investors, some of whom are named, some of whom are unknown, who are able to push the coverage in a particular direction. I've been hearing stories, for example, of a lot of Qatari money floating around the influencer world. Of course, the accusation comes back the other way. They say, well, there's a lot of pro-Israel money floating around out there. That's a relatively new thing. I know the Israeli government now is trying to hire influencers to push the case for Israel. But there has been so much more money spent on the anti-Israel side. And you see it. You see it in the podcast. You see it in some of the online influencers who don't have to disclose their sources of funding, at least to the public. So I think those two things are combining. I do think that the American public remains very solidly pro-Israel. I think the Republican Party remains very solidly pro-Trump and pro-American, pro-Israel. But you are seeing this as a social media phenomenon.
You know, one thing that I saw suggested down there in the States, which is different from here in Canada or the UK, is Canada, we were set to elect a conservative government. And then that went off the rails in the last few months, particularly as Trump talked about annexing Canada. The UK has an atrocious Labour government that's trying to handle the emergence of Islamic independent candidates on the left. So in Canada and the UK, there are enormous battles for commentators to fight, for freedom, for low taxes, against censorship. Like, we have our plates full with things to fight over. In America, you're a rambunctious right-wing MAGA type. You've got the dream president who not only is doing pretty much everything he promised, but he's coming up with new things that you never thought of. And like he's so productive and so energetic that every week there's another win. Trump said you're going to get tired of winning. I remember when he said that. And I think some pundits, what do? Like, literally, what could you ask for Trump to do in terms of his agenda that he hasn't done? I mean, you can criticize him outside that, but he's stopped mass immigration. He's deporting people. He's doing trade deals. He's strengthening the military. He's getting peace without war. I mean, I guess you could be a bored podcaster who goes really nuts on Emmanuel Macron's wife, maybe. I mean, maybe just boredom and wanting conflict is part of it too. I think Qatar is a bigger part of it, and the business model is a bigger part of it. I don't know. What do you think of that theory?
I think you're right. I think some people are tired of winning. And look, opposition is good for the media business model. When you are the party in opposition, you draw more eyeballs. Your media company can gin up subscriptions. I mean, look what happened to the New York Times and the Washington Post during the first Trump term. The Washington Post changed their slogan to "Democracy dies in darkness." Okay, this really sanctimonious idea. But they drew so many more subscribers. The New York Times had been failing. It was falling apart, laying people off. They drew so many subscribers by being anti-Trump. Opposition is also good on the conservative side. So you've got Trump in there. He's doing everything you wanted him to do. And yes, you would think logically, if you really care about the issues that you're purporting to support as a pundit, as a commentator, you should say, great, let's take this further. How can we apply the lessons of winning in this context to other contexts? I mean, that's been my approach, for example, on Israel. Donald Trump intervened in the 12-day war, took out Iran's nuclear sites, and restored America's military deterrent, was part of a massive military success, a diplomatic success that led to the Gaza ceasefire. Why wouldn't you want to expand that, learn from it, export it, celebrate it? No. The pundits on the right who are in this online space, many of them decided that this wasn't good enough, or that it somehow wasn't America first. They linked it to Jeffrey Epstein, saying that the only reason we could support Israel is if Jeffrey Epstein was controlling our politics. There was some disappointment with the way the Trump administration handled the so-called Epstein files, but I don't know that there's much more to that story. Anyway, this became a conspiracy theory on which to hang the ginned up opposition to Trump's very successful foreign policy. I think the shorthand is conspiracy theories are a form of opposition that is particularly potent in the social media world and the podcasting world. And look, there's no older or deeper conspiracy theory than conspiracy theories about Jews and about Israel. And so they're all now going to that mine and mining it for all it's worth. Not very much, but there's a very long way to go and a lot of material. And that's what they're doing. And it's become a business model. And again, I don't think it's swaying opinion, but it is very disturbing. And I don't think it's helping Trump at all. I do think the only effect it's really going to have is it is going to split the MAGA movement. And I'll give you the example that everyone's talking about here in Washington, D.C., where I happen to be when I'm not in Los Angeles, which is the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is the conservative think tank. It's been there for decades. It's highly regarded, well-respected, incredible researchers, academic level work, but on the conservative side. Their policy papers are so respected that even Democrats read them, okay? The Heritage Foundation is now at odds with itself and in a state of constant revolt because the chair or the president of the Heritage Foundation, this guy Kevin Roberts from Texas, he came out and defended Tucker Carlson after Tucker Carlson hosted neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes on his show. Now, of course, Tucker has the right to host Nick Fuentes, but why would you host that guy? I mean, I wrote an article debunking some of his ridiculous conspiracy theories a few years ago, and the people at Breitbart said, you're giving him too much attention even by debunking him. Just leave him alone. So why would you platform him and give him an opportunity to express his views and, as you point out, to support Stalin and so forth? And then Heritage didn't have to say anything because apparently they had already stopped advertising with him months before. But Kevin Roberts came out and said this was a big cancel culture issue and it was about free speech and so forth. So he now attached the Heritage brand not just to Tucker Carlson, but to Nick Fuentes. And so Heritage has been losing some of its best scholars. There are still some good people there trying to make it work, turn the ship around. But essentially, Heritage has been losing people left and right, mostly right. This is one of the most conservative, well-respected, renowned think tanks, and they are destroying their brand because they will not dissociate themselves. And look, there's a difference between the freedom to express a view and a freedom to associate with people, and the idea that this is outside of what we want to associate ourselves with as a conservative movement, as a Republican Party, or as a brand. And you're seeing this split, and it's going to become much worse. You know, the BBC had me on several weeks in a row in the spring to talk about Jeffrey Epstein and how he was so important. He wasn't that important. The BBC was convinced that the Epstein files were going to split the conservative movement. They really didn't. They were sort of a fringe phenomenon, and Democrats seized on it to drive their own messaging in the absence of another message. But this issue of anti-Semitism really could split the MAGA movement because in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, there's a vacuum, and we don't have a spokesman anymore who can say to young Christian activists that being Christian does not mean also excluding all this other stuff. It doesn't mean excluding Jews, doesn't mean excluding love of Israel. In fact, it means embracing those things. It has historically meant that in the United States. So all these other people are rushing in to reclaim his legacy as a conservative Christian young leader, and they're trying to shift it into their own particular direction, which happens to be on the extreme right. And it is going to split the movement unless it is resolved somehow, or unless people simply move on to another issue, which I don't think is likely. So it is a very serious problem, and we're all struggling with how to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an aversion to someone interviewing anyone. I interviewed a terrorist in the UK who was actually later sent to prison. I tried to ask good questions, interesting questions, tough questions. I wouldn't gloss things over. Nick Fuentes is not a terrorist, but he said insanely racist, bigoted things, and you can have him on, but the comparison between how Tucker was kid gloves with Nick Fuentes versus how he grilled Ted Cruz, a very conservative senator, I think that's the issue. And I feel like Tucker's engaging in what Yuri Bezmenov, the KGB defector to the West, called demoralization. Just to, not a military attack on America, but making people confused, undermining them, making them feel tired, making them not understand who's friends and foes anymore. I feel like Tucker, who's very bright, the thing about him and Candace is they're so articulate, and Tucker especially, decades of practice talking to his large audience, that when he wants to undermine morale in America, my God, he can do it. I mean, he is undermining all the pinnings. Like he's even undermining the narrative of World War II. Think about that. The JFK assassination, he's a 9/11 truther now. I feel like that's an operation of sorts, an information operation. That's the only way it makes sense for this guy to change his views 180 degrees. What do you think?
That could be. It also could be this is always how he's felt. In 2020, when he still had a show on Fox News, he would appear every night during the Black Lives Matter riots and tell Americans that nobody cared, nobody was helping, nobody was trying to stop this, which wasn't really true. I mean, it was true of Democrats in city and state government in the places where these riots were happening, but it wasn't true of the Trump administration. Trump was doing everything he could to try to stop the riots, to try to punish people who destroyed statues on federal property, to stand in front of the church that had just been burnt by rioters and hold up the Bible, even though he was ridiculed by the press. Trump was taking a stand. And I remember watching Tucker Carlson at the time and thinking, what is he doing? He's telling his audience that nobody cares, but you've got a president running for re-election who does care. Yeah. And I'm not trying to be a special pleader for Trump here. I'm just saying he was doing everything he could. And he had complete revolt by Mayor Garcetti in LA and Mayor Bowser in DC and all these people. And of course, all the chickens are coming home to roost now. And now they're all running away from their old tweets. All these Democrats and, Mamdani now, he's the mayor of New York City, and he's got to keep the police commissioner on because otherwise people will really panic. But, he's put people on his transition team who believe in defunding the police. So now, there's a legacy. These statements have come back to haunt the Democrats. But Tucker was telling people Trump didn't care, and Trump did care. And so I feel like there could be some element of selfishness involved. I don't want to try to read his mind. I do think that the door needs to be open for him to return. I mean, I said this after the hostage deal. I said to Tucker and Candace, Now is the time to come back. This is a massive victory for Trump. It's an end to war. You guys say you're anti-war. Come back and be part of the conservative movement. But I haven't seen any movement back.